I am so excited to be a part of the She Is Me conference and with so many amazing speakers. It truly is wonderful to hear these amazing women tell their stories. And I'm so glad you're here. And I'd like to ask you to grab a notebook, grab a piece of paper, a pen, because I'm going to ask you some questions to think about. And I'm also going to give you some actionable exercises. One of the problems when people attend conferences is they get all jazzed and excited, and then a week goes by and either they've forgotten things or they've become complacent. And I want to make sure that you put everything into action. So I promise you today, you're going to leave here with a clear plan for moving past your fear. I want to tell you a little bit about my story. As you heard, I am a transformation coach for women in midlife to get past their fear and self-doubt and to truly live life on their terms, confidently and successful. And I came to this out of my own struggles and fears. My first child died of sudden infant death syndrome in 1997, and needless to say, that rocked my world. I went through a horrific divorce. It was chaotic. My second son has intellectual disabilities. And then I met and married my second husband, who 4 weeks after we were married was diagnosed with primary progressive MS. So in very short order, I went from a newlywed to being a caregiver. And so there were so many pressures and stress and fear around all of those things. And I learned to get over it. It wasn't easy. And I want to share with you how to get past those fears so you can live life as happily. And truly, my dream is to create a world of women who embrace their strength and aren't afraid to let it show through. And I think it's even more important for our daughters. We need to set a role model for our future generations. So let's start out by saying that not all fear is bad. Right? I live in Wilton, Connecticut. There are bears here. Okay. There's nothing wrong with being afraid of a bear, or there's nothing wrong if you are in a parking garage and you feel somebody following you or just get that feeling. There's nothing wrong with that. And in fact, that's healthy. But what I'm talking about are those irrational fears that prevent us from making great choices in our life and to live life confidently. And that is what I'm talking about. And the key here is to control the fear, not allow it to control you, right? We're never going to get over all our fears, but we need to find a way to control them. So here's the first exercise, and I give this to all of my coaching clients. I want you to objectify your fear. And here's what I mean by that. I want you to see fear as an object inside of you. So for example, for me, I see it as this little ball of black coal. It's hard and it's tiny. And because I see it in me, I can put it aside sometimes. It's there. It's never going to go away, but I can acknowledge it. I can see it and I can let it go. So what could that look like for you? Maybe it's maybe it's the Grinch, maybe it's green fog, maybe it's slime, whatever that can look like to you. I want you to objectify that fear. And I also want to let you know, and it'll come up later, I have a free giveaway on my website, 5 tips to really reduce fear and live boldly. And you can grab that on my website, alison-jacobson.com for free. But let's talk about fear because it really is a learned response. I mean, think about little kids, right? Think about babies. Think about 3 or 4-year-olds. They have no fear. They literally have no fear. And here's the thing. They believe they can do or be anything they want. Most of them know that they have their parents as a safe net. So they feel a safety so that they don't have to feel fear. And they also don't see challenges as something to fear. Okay. Those are all things we learn as we get older. And how did that happen? So I want to talk about that a little bit, right? And so let's think about a kid, right? If you ask a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old who they want to be when they grow up, they're going to say the president. They're going to say, a NBA star. They're going to say a supermodel. They're going to say a YouTube influencer. They think they could be anything. And that's great. They have no limiting beliefs. They believe they can do anything they want to. So what happens? How do we get to the point where we allow limiting beliefs and the fear of going after our dreams stop us? Well, it starts with our parents. And even if they're well-meaning, and they usually are, they have beliefs that they pass on to us. Okay. Think about in your family dynamics, if you had brothers or sisters, how often did you hear your mom and dad say, oh, she's the smart one, or oh my gosh, she's just great at athletics, my other daughter not so much? It just started seeping into you what you could and couldn't do. Okay. And it started forming that. And then it went on to coaches. It even went on to your first bosses, right? So we started hearing who we were and what we could do. And this got ingrained in us into a belief, right? And it was all of those things that started forming the fears we have about ourselves. So, for example, I have a friend. She lived in New York City all her life. She moved out here. She never drove. She has extreme anxiety about driving. And now she's passed that along to her 16 and 17-year-old to the point that they're afraid to drive, right? And she didn't mean to do it, but it was just her own inner anxiety and fear. And now her kids have fear of driving, right? Or what about the boss who always shoots down ideas to the point that you don't feel like you can bring up ideas or break out of your mold and try a different position in your career because you've always been told you can't by a boss? So these are all the fears. And we end up constructing this image of ourselves based on what other people tell us. So here's the first question I want you to write down. What fear do you have that you learned from a family member? What fear do you have that you learned from a family member? I'm going to give you my own example. My mother was never athletic. She just was very scared of taking risks athletically. And because of that, I was nervous about it. I was afraid to ski. I was afraid to try out for a team sport. I was always afraid of getting hurt. And I that was an ingrained, and she didn't mean to do it with me to me, but I just heard what she said. I saw how she reacted. I heard her concern when I first started saying, I want to try out for this. I want to do this. And the immediate response was, oh, be careful. And you only have to hear that a certain amount of times where that, oh, be careful, becomes a fear that became ingrained in me that I never would have had. Okay, so the first exercise I want you to think of, that was the first question, is I want you to think of a fear you have, right? And what proof do you have that makes it a fact? Okay, so I'll go back to my example of being afraid to ski. What proof do I have that I will break my leg skiing? Do I know people that haven't broken their leg skiing, right? I'm sure I know thousands of it. So we need to start really looking at that fear and saying, is it a fact or is it a belief? Here's another example, public speaking. That's one of the greatest fears for so many people, is public speaking. So I want you to think, if this is one of your fears, what is your fear of public speaking? Are you afraid you're going to forget what you say? Are you afraid you're going to forget your lines? Are you afraid people are going to think of you as a fraud? What is that fear around public speaking? And then I want you to think of people you know who speak in public. It could be, people like me. You don't even know me, but you're seeing me. Or it could be friends. Do you know somebody who's given a toast at a wedding? Who do you know that's given a speech in public and they haven't self-combust, right? They've survived it and it was enjoyable. So start thinking about those proof points to show that that fear you have is not a fact, it's a belief. Okay, so that's one of the first things. The other thing about little kids is they strut their stuff, right? They think they are the greatest. They will walk around dancing around in a tutu. They will start singing like they're Britney Spears. They will, think they're a supermodel. They'll go outside in a bikini and run around in a water sprinkler, right? They just lived that way. And then we got to the point when we grew up of hiding ourselves, right? We don't sing in public. We don't go dancing. We certainly aren't going to run outside in a bikini, right? We learned that that was not socially acceptable, right? Where did we learn this from, right? We've been fed a steady stream of what we should look like, how we should act, how we should behave by social media and marketing. Okay. One of the best things I love, it was for those of you who've ever watched the show Seinfeld, there was an episode where Elaine went on the dance floor and started dancing, and she was horrible. She was absolutely horrible, but she was rocking her stuff and she didn't care. She was happy as can be. She had no fear or intimidation on doing that. And that's the way I want you to think about it. Women, we censor our looks, especially, right? I mean, in this curated world of Instagram and everything, all we see are these beautiful up photos where we have filters on them, right? And we get this fear that we're not enough, that we're not pretty enough, that we're not smart enough, that we're not thin enough, right? And we want to conform to the standards that we've been told are acceptable, right? It's not real. So this fear translates into a lack of confidence, right? In socializing, we feel like we can't go out in public. We can't go onto dating sites. We can't go networking professionally because we're not skinny enough, or we don't have the right clothes, or whatever it is. We have bad hair. And so it becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy. You're afraid to go out and network. So therefore you don't make the connections, you don't meet people personally or professionally, and therefore you say, see, I'm not good enough. And it becomes this vicious cycle. So we need to break out of that, okay? We need to realize that the only person that needs to see that confidence is the one in the mirror. You need to see that and realize that it's confidence that's sexy. It's not having the perfect body. I guarantee you, think of Lizzo, right? For those of you who know who Lizzo is, man, she has confidence oozing everywhere. That girl is sexy beyond belief. Okay, that's what I want you to see. She has no fear of going out in public. She has no fear of strutting her stuff. That's how I want you to feel. So here's the next writing exercise. In a journal, I want you to write down 3 things that you love about yourself. I know that's not easy. I want you to write down 3 things that you love about yourself, but I want one of those things to be some physical attribute. You must write down one physical attribute you love about yourself. And I also want to give you a practical exercise about channeling confidence. So when I was going through my divorce, it was, I was in and out of court literally, I think about 25 times. Like the bailiff got to know me on a first name basis. It was pretty bad, but I never got past that fear at first. It took me like 10 or 12 times. It always felt horrible walking into court. And with my coaching clients before COVID, I would literally take them on field trips to the courthouse so they understood how it was going to feel, because it's intimidating, it's scary, it's just not the place to be. And what happened was, because of this, I found myself sweating profusely and stumbling over my words, and it was just horrible. Like, I made a really bad impression. And so I decided I needed to be somebody else. I needed to channel someone who epitomized kick-ass for me. And for me, for any of you who've ever watched the show Scandal, that was the show. Kerry Washington, her character Olivia Pope, man, she was the one. And so when I started walking to court, I was Olivia Pope. I walked like her. I had facial expressions like her. I acted like her. I just became Olivia Pope. I thought, how would Olivia address this situation? And so I want you to start doing that. Whenever you're nervous in a situation, I want you to start channeling someone in your life who you think of as a badass. It could be a family member, it could be a friend, it could be a celebrity, a business person, an author, it could be a fictional character like mine. Whoever that is, I want you to start channeling that person, feeling like them and acting like them. And I promise you, that will get you past that fear. Okay. The other problem, like we said, with kids, they always felt like they had a safety net of mom and dad, right? They could go out and do things. Mom and dad had them, usually. But when we have that safety net gone, we tend to stay in situations where even though they may not be great for us, we feel safe, right? So often, I deal with women going through divorce who are in horrible situations, but they're afraid to leave that situation because the fear of change is worse than dealing with the situation they're dealing with. And so I get that, but it prevents us from having wonderful experiences. It prevents us from taking that safari. It prevents us from moving across country. It prevents us from going online and finding a new wonderful relationship. And so we have to be okay with being uncomfortable for a while and change, because change is good. Okay. So we have to start thinking about that and keep remembering fear is not a fact. Okay. It's only a thought we have in the future. And what we need to focus on is present moment. One of the worst things is, and I'm sure you've experienced this, you lay in bed at night and all of a sudden you're awake with all of these stressful, fearful thoughts going through your head. And it grows and grows and grows and grows, right? It becomes just overwhelming. And that goes back to making the fear small. But the way to get over that is to start thinking in the present moment. Don't get tied up in the future. Okay, you'll get there. And so again, I have my son with intellectual disabilities. I have my husband with primary progressive MS. There's a lot I worry about in the future of being a caregiver, of what if I get sick, all of that. Those are all beliefs. I don't know any of those are going to happen. And so what I do is deal with the here and now. And I say to myself, everything's fine right now. But I start taking small steps to plan for the future. Because I always say knowledge is power. And when you have a plan, you will be okay. So I want you to think of a goal you have that you've been putting off because you're afraid of it, right? So maybe it is, I don't know, going on a cruise by yourself. Okay, maybe this is what you want to do, but you're holding yourself back because you've never traveled by yourself and you're really nervous about traveling by yourself. I want you to write down 5 steps that you can do getting ready to the point where you can travel by yourself. So that might look like going out to dinner by yourself. That might be researching cruises. That might be talking to somebody who's gone on a cruise by themselves or a trip by themselves. So I want you to start making those plans and building up to it. Here's another example, right? If you want to start your own business, right? I was just talking to someone who went from being a scientist to being a fashion designer. Oh my God, that's amazing, right? But I am sure there was fear in that step. So I want you to think of 5 steps you can take towards that new career. So maybe it is just signing up for a domain name. Maybe it's ordering business cards. Maybe it's starting a Facebook page. But one of the things I want those 5 to do is to introduce yourself to 3 people as that person. And what I mean by that is if you're going to be an interior designer, I want you to introduce yourself to 3 people and say, I'm an interior designer. Going back to the cruise example, I want you to say to 3 people, you know, when you're, whoever you are, know, out in public, I'm going on a cruise by myself. If they ask you when, you'll say, well, I haven't booked it yet, but I want you to start talking about it, thinking about it, because as soon as you start putting those small steps into place, I guarantee you the fear is going to start diminishing. The other thing, like I said about kids, is they don't see challenges as scary, right? If you give a kid, a little kid, a puzzle or a test or something, they see it as a challenge, right? They're not afraid of failing. We have a learned behavior about failing. And again, that started when we were little. right? Teachers drilled into us, you can't fail your test. Coaches, you have to win. And so we learned this experience of you can't fail. You must win. And we get to the point where we're afraid of even trying because we're afraid of failure. But here's the thing. Failure is not a setback. Failure is the opportunity to learn. Think about it with your kids, right? If your child came home with a C on a test, would you yell and scream at them? I hope not. I hope you tell them that this is an opportunity to learn, right? You wouldn't tell them to drop out of school. Here's another example. If you were driving across country, say you were going from New York to San Diego, if your car had a flat tire, if you hit a roadblock, if you hit traffic, you wouldn't stop driving to San Diego. You'd get your tire fixed or you'd go on a detour. You wouldn't stop wherever you are or say, oh, I'm going to go home. I can't make it to San Diego. You'd figure out a way around it. And that is exactly what happens if you make a mistake. I am running the New York City Marathon. I've never run in my life. I only started training in November. I could only run 1 mile. Last week, I ran 15 miles. But yesterday, I was only able to run 3 miles. I was exhausted. And instead of thinking of it as a failure, I thought, okay, what changed? What do I need to do differently? How am I going to get to the next step? I didn't stop and say, okay, that's it. I'm not going to run the marathon. So what I'm saying is reframe failure as an opportunity to learn. Okay. The other thing is, in order to succeed, in order to get past your fear, resilience is the key trait you need to have. And to get resilience, you need to have a powerful why. Why am I running the New York City Marathon? Because it's 25 years since my son Connor died. It's his 25th anniversary. I'm doing it in honor of him. That is my why. That is my great and passionate why. That's why I won't stop. You have to have a compelling, passionate reason for why you want to do something. Because as soon as you have that great and powerful why, like I talk about, the fear is minimized. And that why becomes a lot stronger than that fear, and you will succeed. Okay. So here's another exercise I always give to my clients. Okay. It is, first of all, I want you to write down why you want to achieve that goal. What's the great and powerful why? And then I want you to play the if so, then what game. And here's what I mean by that. I want you to think of all of the obstacles and challenges that you are afraid of in reaching that goal. Let's go back to opening your own business. Okay. What's your powerful why for opening your own business? And it can't just be to make money, because money gives you something. It may give you freedom, it may give you safety, but why is it that you want to open that business? And then I want you to go back and think of the obstacles and fears you have to opening that business. So maybe one is no one's going to buy my product that I'm selling. Okay. So the if so is, if people don't buy the product I'm selling, then what will I do? So the then might be, well, I'll market to a different audience, or I will modify the product. So I want you to keep, and then it goes on to that. Well, if I modify the product and it still doesn't sell, then what will I do? So the then might be, I'll bring in an expert in marketing the product or whatever it is. So I want you to keep doing the if so, then what of what that fear is. It might be something less than opening a business. Maybe, for example, it is, I have a fear of going on a dating site. Okay, I don't want to put myself out there. I'm afraid of a dating site. So the if so could be, if I put myself on a dating site, I'm going to meet horrible guys. No one's going to be attracted to me. Okay. If no one's attracted to me, then is I will change up my profile, or I will, find friends who have put their profiles up on dating sites and see how it differs. Okay. So you're going to keep working through it so that you see there's an answer for every one of your fears till you break it down and break it down and break it down. Okay. So that's the next one. I think the biggest intimidation factor and the biggest fear, and I had this when I got divorced, I had a lot of fear and intimidation around my ex. And every time I saw an email come in from him, or even when I saw him in public, I would get a knot in my stomach. I literally would be afraid. And I have to remind you, October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And yes, physical abuse exists, but emotional and verbal abuse exists as well. And I want you to remember that, because those scars, even though they're on the inside, are just as powerful. And so I literally work with hundreds of women who have been emotionally abused or verbally abused and don't know how to get past it. And there's a couple ways of doing this, and I want to give them to you because it can be scary and intimidating dealing with your ex. So here's a couple of tips when you have somebody, or even it could even be an ex-friend, whoever it is that intimidates you and you have fear around. First of all, make sure that you only look at those person, you only deal in email with that person. You will not accept phone calls, you will not accept texts. And here's why. Emails can go into a separate box and they could be considered later. You do not have to answer immediately. Okay. In email also, you can choose how you want to respond. You can make it very neutral, because the other thing I'm going to say is you want to create scripts when you're dealing with this person. And what I mean by that is 5 sentences that you keep neutral and always repeat. No matter how that person tries to get you going and rattle you, you don't do anything except stick to the script. And the other thing that's most important is to objectify the person. Here's what I mean by that. The person you are divorcing, the person you no longer have a relationship with, is no longer the person you knew. And so you have to take the emotion out of it. And you can do that by creating a different person. So let me give you an example. One of the things I dislike more than anything is lima beans. So I renamed my ex Lima Bean. In my phone, he is labeled as Lima Bean. I refer to him as LB. In front of the kids, I only refer to him as LB. He is Lima Bean. And the reason that is because then I can take off that emotion that came with that person. And it allows me to neutralize my feelings. So that's one of the other tricks I have for you. The key really is to keep building your confidence. Work on this. It doesn't happen overnight. Fear doesn't go away overnight. You've developed these fears through a long time, but keep pushing one step at a time, one little small step at a time. And if you want more information, I also have a new book that just came out, Daily Inspirations for Midlife Women, a guide to peace, joy, confidence, and abundance. And these are just little morning and evening affirmations and quotes to lift you up and to give you the strength and confidence and courage you need. And you can find it on Amazon. So thank you very much. I am so honored to be part of this conference.